Hi, Alex Maximic here from Leonard Commercial in Toronto. I wanted to speak to you today about the agreement to lease. You can have several different types of documents. When you are looking to lease space, it can be a letter of intent, which is typically not a binding document. It could be an offer to lease, which is a more simplified version of a lease document. Typically doesn't have all the legal nuances perhaps that a lease has, and hence is a bit quicker potentially to negotiate. But wanted to speak to you today about what we in Canada typically negotiate as a legal binding document. So that typically is the offer or agreement to lease. So I just wanted to go through a couple of points with respect to that document. Obviously, it's a binding document once executed, unless it's conditional on different, sorts of approval. But again, typically it is a legal and binding document. Landlord and tenant, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. As a tenant, you may want to sign it under a numbered company. Landlord may want, depending on the covenant of that company, have you personally indemnify that lease. Take a look at one of my other videos with respect to guarantee and indemnification. Typically, what you want to do as a tenant is limit your personal liability. In this case, the landlord may be able to or may be willing to negotiate that covenant based on perhaps you providing a better deposit, a more thorough deposit, but that's something to be negotiated. And by the way, a lot of these clauses really depend on the strength of the tenant, the covenant, and the amount of leverage that you do have. Trade name. Okay, so typically, if you're a franchisor, it's going to be the trade name of the of your head company. The franchisee will be operating under that trade name. If you're a smaller mom and pop type company, you're going to probably try to incorporate a trade name and use that as your business. Premises. I think it's really important to take a look at what the square footage is, and I would typically recommend that you get that space certified. If there's no certification, or if the landlord has a floor plan, I would just deem the area. So you're both agreeable on the existing square footage of that floor plan, and you've walked the area. In the future, if you have it deemed, the landlord cannot remeasure that premises. Term, well, depends on the type of business you are. If you're a startup, perhaps you want a shorter term and multiple options. If you're a more sophisticated tenant, you've been in business for a long time, you can execute a longer term lease. Further, if you've got substantial leasehold improvements, you probably want to amortize those over a longer period of time. Hence, your initial term may be 10 years. But in both cases, you probably want to get some additional renewal options, and those can be shorter terms of 2 or 3 year options, or in the case of more substantial tenant franchise, multiple 5-year options. Fixturing period, when you're going into a new location, obviously it's going to take you some time to build out that premises. The more extensive the leasehold, the longer you're going to need for a fixturing period. A restaurant, as an example, would need at least 6 months of fixturing period. But if you're a dollar store, as an example, you only may need a couple of months. So really depends on the type of tenant. Minimum rent, obviously you're going to be paying market rent, and who determines market rent? Well, that's where you negotiate. Hopefully have a very strong commercial agent that can help you come up with substantial data to ascertain what fair market rent is. And again, if you're in need of data, feel free to reach out. Additional rent, well, this is what you pay over and top of your net rent. So in some cases they call it TMI, taxes, maintenance, and insurance. In other cases it's common area maintenance plus taxes, and those are municipal property taxes over and above. But common area maintenance costs can vary substantially. So again, depends on your leverage, your financial strength, the type of tenant you are. If you're an anchor tenant, obviously you're going to pay less in terms of common area maintenance. The landlord's going to want to entice you as a tenant to act as an anchor, and hence some of the smaller tenants will probably absorb some of those costs that the anchor tenant aren't paying. But good to get a full, thorough breakdown of what your additional rent is, and if you've got leverage, try to cap that cost going forward in the future. Deposits, well, depending on, again, what type of tenant you are. If you're a bank, typically they do not pay deposits. Landlords shouldn't be overly concerned with a bank covenant. But if you're a smaller mom and pop type tenant and don't have a lot of experience, yeah, the landlord's going to probably demand at least last month's rent and potentially an additional month or two of rent over and on top of that. Use clause, as a tenant, you're going to try to get as broad a use clause as possible. You may carry additional products in the future that you don't carry today. As a landlord, you're going to try to restrict that. You want to have the option of leasing out space to many different types of tenants, and you don't want to have disputes in the future with respect to who's carrying what. So that is that. In terms of radius restrictions, typically we don't see that in a lot of commercial leases. Sometimes in retail leases where the landlord has even percentage rent and doesn't want an additional location to cannibalize the sales of that retail location. Again, especially if they're getting percentage rent. Tenants work, well, typically, a tenant will take over the premises in as-is shell condition. If it's a new premises, you probably want it in the vanilla shell condition, which means that it's bare walls, drywall, tape sanded. You got the electrical that you require, the amount of HVAC that you require, bare floor. You've got proper commercial front glazing and doors, and yeah, that's typically what your vanilla shell is. And in terms of landlord's work, again, it depends on what type of tenant you are. You may want an inducement. If you're a new business, restaurants in a lot of cases want as high an inducement as possible. Again, they've got substantial leasehold improvements that may be difficult to finance. So if a landlord can share the burden of financing those costs, obviously you're going to see that in your additional net rental amounts. So if market is $30 a square foot and you're looking for $50 a square foot in inducements, obviously over a 10-year period, expect to see your additional rent increase by $2 or $3 over the net market rent. What are some of the other clauses? options to renew. Again, I think we've talked about that previously. If you're a bona fide tenant, the landlord will give you multiple options to renew. Could be, you know, three-year options, or it could be multiple 5-year options. And just so you know, this is in the landlord or in the tenant's favor to get as many additional renewal options as possible. For a landlord, he'll want to restrict that, especially in a dynamic city such as Toronto, where we're really looking at densifying sites that could in the future be redeveloped. So yeah, you may have even parking clauses within the lease. Obviously, you want it to be as convenient for your employees and your customers as possible. If you've got a lot of parking, the challenge in Toronto is the site may be a potential redevelopment play in the future. Conditions, yeah, in a lot of cases the offer to lease is conditional. Sometimes it's conditional on the landlord's executive approving the deal, sometimes the tenant's executive approving the deal. In some cases it's really conditional on doing a financial check of the tenant. In other cases, you know, it could be for the tenant to obtain financing in order to build out their existing location. Other clauses, you know, we talked about were inducements. You know, it could be a minimum rent-free period. Typically, if that's something that's negotiated, the landlord will try to increase the rent to make up for that rent-free period. Exclusivity. You know, again, depending on the type of tenant, if you're in a retail strip plaza and you're perhaps a bank, you may have the financial strength to get exclusivity, but now nowadays even the banks aren't getting full exclusivity. The landlord, that is, may restrict the number of banks in a certain location, but really difficult to get full exclusivity nowadays. I think that pretty much answers most of the high-end questions that pertain to landlord and tenant lease clauses. And just wanted to say, if there's any conditions, or I should say any questions with respect to negotiating some of the aspects of an offer to lease, it really depends on market conditions and the leverage of either the landlord or the tenant. In a low vacancy market such as Toronto, where if you're an industrial tenant or a retail tenant and today's vacancy rate is around 2%, as a tenant you're not going to have very much leverage. But you know, if you're an office tenant in Toronto, where office vacancies are probably in around 15%, depending where you are, you've got a lot of leverage. Definitely a tenant's market when it comes to office tenancy in Toronto. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. If there are additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Email is amaksymec@leonard.com. And if you need to give me a call, by all means, 416-915-5274. And again, would be more than happy to answer any of your commercial leasing questions. Thank you. Take care.